data is the biggest tool in their arsenal. Whenever they write a storyline or they want to tell a story, right? Data always adds a lot of credibility to it. So without data, your story or anything that you are putting out externally will not hold a lot of water, right? It just becomes a storyline, right? So I think data is their best friend. They should treat best friend as I think they should treat data as their best friend to tell a story. So I think that's something they need to learn a lot. I got into PR by accident. Okay, I had no clue about PR. During my journalism, I did my graduation in journalism, right? So when I was doing my journalism and all that, I wanted to get into advertising. And we had an internship to do during our last year of our college in 2006. After my third year in college, I was looking for an internship in advertising because that's where I wanted to get into, right? I wanted to experience advertising, how it works, right? Client servicing or creative, but unfortunately I couldn't crack an internship because in that May-June time, majority of kids go for the internship, and when all these agencies back then used to take a lot of interns, right? And I think everyone had taken those interns, and I couldn't crack the internship. So my brother told me that he has a school friend who works in some PR agency and he could help me out, to get an internship. So I actually hounded him every week. I used to call him, I'm looking for an internship. So I think after 3 weeks, he said, I don't know if there's internship in any advertising agency I can get you through, but why don't you try your hand in PR and come and meet me in my office? And so I went to his office. This was in Lodhi Road, and that time it was a small. Now it's not longer a small. It's one of the largest agencies in India. It's called Avon Media. At that time it was in a 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom apartment in Lodhi Road in Delhi. So I went, met him, and he gave me, Manas is his name, and he gave me my first break into PR. Right, I joined there as a management trainee, and that time I had no clue how PR works, and I had gone in a kurta and jeans, thinking it's like advertising, right? So they told me that I can't wear kurta and jeans. I need to be in formals because you're in PR, you're not in advertising anymore, right? So yeah, that's how my journey in PR started, and that was my first stint in 2006 when I think for 1 week or 2 weeks, I only did. At that time, there was no internet, for sending. I mean, there was internet, but we used to send out press releases through fax machines. Right, we used to write fax, dear so and so with pencil, and for 1 week I have done that, sending fax to journalists across publications and across the country, right? Dear so and so, please accept this with regards, Himanshu. Then again, rub it with a eraser, and then send it to the next journalist. So I have faxed, I think, non-stop for 1 week. That was my introduction to PR. So back then, there's no tracking agency then. We were the one tracking everything, right? Cut, copy, paste. You were the ones to reach the agency, to reach the office first, right? If the office starts at 9 o'clock, you have to reach 1 hour ahead, say 8 o'clock, and then start tracking and see where your client is first. So that's how you divide, right? First, you see direct coverage. Then you see competition coverage. Then you look at industry news, right? So, and you cannot miss direct coverage, right? Where your client is mentioned. So you have to read the paper, track the paper, cut. Then in a sheet you have to copy paste it. With the clue you have to paste it, and then scan it, and then you could email it or you could fax it. Both the options were there. So you have to do that. The Nike account for MSL Group. This was in 2012, 2013, right? And Nike was the biggest client that we had, part of my portfolio, and I was leading that account. So we had launched, and at that time Sahara had, and Nike had just bagged the contract to be the Indian jersey sponsor, right? Nike had just become that, and we launched that campaign. And we launched the first new jersey in Rajkot. This was in 2013 series against Australia, and Rajkot ka Naya Stadium had just been finished, and there was the first match in 2013, I think, 2013, 2014, something like that. So I think that was one big campaign. That was, I think, my biggest press conference as well, because it was BCCI, it was Nike launching its new uniform for the Indian cricket team, and I mean, we had seen big press conferences, right, where your client, you get 50 journalists, 80 journalists, right, in a big press conference. But this time, I think we had more than 300 journalists from across the world coming to cover it. Imagine, they were Australian journalists, they were Indian journalists, they were journalists from UK who had come to cover that series, right? It was, I think, it was India-Australia series, and this was the first time in the new stadium in Rajkot. So yeah, I mean, that was one of the biggest press campaigns that we had launched, and that time there was no concept of influencers. There was a concept of bloggers who had just started cropping up, right? These bloggers used to write their blogs on fashion or sports. In fact, I remember at that time, gold.com was also growing up, right? So they used to write those kind of publications, right? Sportskeeda had just come up. Publications like, so those guys were there. So that time there were no influencers. There were these bloggers who used to write, who had also come to cover that event. So yeah, I think that was one of the biggest one of the biggest campaigns, my first big campaign, I would say. So I think the most impactful campaign from a business perspective, or the PR perspective, has been, I mean, because there are two kinds of impacts, right? One is the brand impact or the reputation impact, and one is the business impact. So I'll give you the one I think most impactful from a business point of view was, we did this recently in Pristyn Care last year on World IVF Day, right? We wanted to do a study on index. IVF is still a very new concept in the Indian market still, right? Not many people come and talk about it. So we wanted to know how the market is doing, how, not just from a market point of view, but people who have gone through the entire process of IVF. Who are these people, right? We wanted to know what is their age group, and which part of the country they are from, and what is their background, and why did they go for IVF, right? Things like that. So we wanted to know more from a business point of view, more from the patient perspective. We wanted to know, right? So we did a study of, I think we had taken 1,500 patients who have gone through, or have gone through, if not gone through, but have about IVF, or have a basic sense of IVF, right? That was our basic mandate. So we did this thing, and we released a report. We did a social media campaign around it. We had videos created for that, as a surround campaign, and it was a PR-led campaign, right? And that study had some tremendous data, right? We called it the Great Indian IVF Survey, and we found that women were the ones who were taking the final call when it comes to going through the IVF treatment, right? 75% of couples who have gone through the process of IVF were at the age group of 25 to 35 years old, quite young. Generally, people think that IVF is for slightly older audience, right? 40, late 30s and early 40s, right? So yeah. And one big thing we found out was 70%, almost 80% people said that IVF is not a taboo at all. And this is coming from people from tier 2 towns, right? Where we thought IVF might be a taboo, right? So we did this Great Indian IVF report. We did a media announcement. We did a social campaign around it, and our brand searches that 3-4 days went through the roof. We saw a 10x spike on our brand searches, right? That means it was a direct impact on the brand. People were looking at Pristyn Care for IVF, or they were at least reading about what we do in IVF, right? So that was a direct impact of PR on this, on IVF. We also tried looking at how many people have come to to Pristyn Care through the press release report, right? So I think some 60% had read the story, and then they had inquired about IVF to our toll-free number. So that was like a direct impact we had on from a PR campaign. So yeah, that I think that's one of the most interesting campaign we did recently. So Pristyn Care is one of the largest healthcare providers in the country. We are majorly into secondary care. Okay, so there's primary care, there's secondary care, and there's tertiary care, right? So secondary care or elective surgeries that we do, that's what we focus on. Majority of our business is. So, for example, hernia, kidney stone, things like we do surgeries which are not emergency surgeries but elective surgeries. People who decide the time and date, I can do the surgery tomorrow. These are not emergency surgeries. This is not a life and death matter, but these are preventive care surgeries, because if you don't do the surgeries or you don't take preventive action, you might develop even more complicated issue. You might have you might get even more complicated issue later in life, right? So we do piles, hernia, circumcision, gallbladder stone, kidney stone, hair transplant, things like that. So anything which can be planned surgery or needs a surgical procedure, dental, those kind of processes we do. So I had reputation and policy communications. So PR is one part of the role, right? So it just doesn't just PR, it's internal communication, external engagement, events, anything policy communications, right? So we have a GR team which does a lot of direct stakeholder engagement, right? So to support them with policy communication, right? Targeted towards stakeholders, regulators. So I take care of that. Yeah. So there are two fronts, right? So one is you do a lot of educational content for the patients, directly, reaching, directly made for the patient, where we educate them about different diseases. Can be about proctology, gynae, urology, vascular, ortho, ophthalmology, right? So there is that. Second is using media to educate. So we do all this on social. That's one. Then second is using media to educate the media, the journalists, and the public in general, right? So we have a lot of these health days, right? Recently there was World Health Day, World Liver Day, then World Kidney Day, so all World Sight Day, things like that. So we do a lot of educational content featuring our doctors when they talk about certain diseases or certain conditions, right? Cataracts, LASIK, or if it's World Kidney Day, talking about stones, and what kind of stones then they have, patient can suffer from, or if it's for example, there is in November it's World Piles Day. It's an actual day when on November it's I think celebrated, where we talk about piles, fissure, and all proctology related diseases, right? So we send out a lot of articles in the media. We do send out a lot of content to the media, so people can read about it and they can be aware of what those diseases mean, what those conditions mean, and how they can mitigate those, or how they can take care of those conditions. In healthcare, rather than being creative, you have to focus on the seriousness of the matter. That's one. And secondly, you have to give a lot of data, you have to give a lot of facts to the patient to make them understand the seriousness of the condition, right? And we also do a lot of studies on various diseases on different months, right? To understand how the Indian psyche is, or how the Indian patient is, right? So we take one subject and we have done studies of, for example, on vascular, on aesthetics, on orthopedics, on proctology. So in fact, we did this study on piles, right? So piles is a very common condition in India, right? But it's still a very, very big taboo, right? It's a taboo subject. And I don't know if you've seen in Indian OTT series, it's used. I mean, Babasi is a very common gali or a curse word they use, right? Because people still connect it and they don't want to talk about it because they think it's a very shameful condition. And in fact, we had found in the study that 70% of Indians have noticed the word piles being disrespectfully used in films and TV, right? 70% of them have agreed. Plus, the sheer basically lack of knowledge of these diseases also contribute to a lot of things going bad, right? So they don't have clear understanding on what causes the condition or what is the treatment for it. So there's a lack of knowledge as well, which we try to mitigate through content, right? In Hindi, or we do a lot of language content we send out in the media, right? It's not just English, but Hindi, Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Bengali, or local languages. So we connect with publications in these tier 2, tier 3 towns, because these guys are reading those publications. People in tier 3, those kind of towns and cities, they will not be reading Times of India and Hindustan Times. They read their local publications. So we target those kind of publications where the target audience or the patient is, and give a lot of content there, right? So, and to make them understand or make them aware of the various diseases or conditions that they are. I was during my stint at IBM, I used to lead communications for IBM Labs, which is the IBM used to have 3 labs back in the day. In 2014, I had joined them. They had IBM Research Labs, IBM Systems Technology Lab, and IBM Software Labs. And you should know IBM is, I think, one of the has the leading number of patents in the world. Highest number of patents in the world. So they used to come out with these studies, right? The scientists from IBM Research Lab used to come out with a lot of these studies on cryptography or quantum computing, or quantum algorithms, or blockchain back in the day. And blockchain was like a unheard of topic as well, right? So I think the first time I read a report or a study or a white paper that published was on blockchain, and they said that blockchain is going to be the next currency, right? And they had a lot of hardcore data in it. And I think then I realized that there are a lot of these stories, a lot of these data related stories can be told to people in general, and in the media we can do a lot of engagements, because then I realized that we can use this data to make some interesting storylines, right? So that was the first time I realized that data would be very useful going forward in PR or in storytelling in general, because it validates what you are saying. It sort of adds a bit of credibility to your story as well. And I think it has changed. In PR, if you don't have data, I don't think anyone will believe you, or the story becomes believable. So there are a couple of metrics that we follow, right? And I follow as a PR and comms person, right? But I think the most important metrics that we should follow is, one is sentiment, tonality, right? And not just brand. There are multiples. You can dig deeper there, right? One is sentiment about your brand, about your industry, and about your competition. Then you can compare yourself where you stand, right? For example, if you are in blockchain, you can study how's the sentiment about blockchain in general industry. Then you can also measure what is the sentiment of your competition or competitive brands. How are they stand? Where do they stand in terms of tonality, sentiment, positive, negative, neutral, and vis-a-vis where you are as well, right? So that is, I think, one very strong metric. Another one from a very quantitative perspective is, I think, category of publication, right? I mean, if a brand is constantly in a very Cat A sort of publication, right, in a regular basis, I think it also adds to a certain credibility for the brand, right? So that is the second one, right? Cat A publication, right? And across the board. Third metric, I would say, is share of headlines, not share of voice, but share of headlines. Share of voice is, I don't think it's a very important metric, because it doesn't add up much, when you versus how many clips you have garnered compared to your competition, right? That doesn't say anything. But share of headline says, because you are there in the headline, that means that story is that much powerful, right? If you are there in the headline or in the subheading, that means the story, it's an important story, and it adds to it, and it'll add a lot of value to the brand. So I think share of headline is a very important metric as well. I think I would like to conjure two sort of metrics to cover to evaluate communications as a whole, right? One is called I would call it influence score. It is very similar to a news score that Wiziki gives, right? Or an M score that I think is it's in Meltwater, which is basically volume of news plus presence of headline presence plus reach of the publication and readership prominence and so on and so forth, right? So similarly, I would want to know the influence score of a story, right? Which is basically how influential was that story or that campaign was, to influence a decision or influence the target audience, right? It would be calculated using various data sources like social media engagement, website traffic, media mentions, brand sentiment, and a lot of other things. So that is one thing I would like to conjure up. If I could know the influence score of a campaign or a story, that is something from a very strategic level I would want to know. And secondly, influence score would help PR or comms professionals to understand the overall influence of their brand and identify areas of improvement, right? How influential the brand is, or if PR is helping them sell their product or services in the market, right? So it will help them understand that properly. That's from a very strategic level, and from a very tactical level, I will want to know, and it's available, but I don't think publications give it out. Is the number of people who are reading a certain article right now? If I get an article in Times of India or HT, I would not know unless I ask the journalist or the publication directly how many people have read it, and that's the data that generally they don't give it out easily, right? So that it's something I would want to know. If today my story has come out in Times of India, how many people have actually read it, right? So that is something people I think still work on guesstimation, that those numbers are available only with the publications. So at a tactical level, I will also want to know that. PR is not just about media engagement, okay? PR is not just about reaching out to the media, the journalists, and getting your stories printed. I think going forward, PR will turn into more sort of a reputation, sort of an umbrella. We'll have a reputation, sort of an umbrella, which will have everything: media, social media, influencer, internal stakeholders, employees, which basically the comms person job would be to improve the reputation of the brand. And it will not be done only through media stories. The overall brand reputation has to improve, right? Today, if a brand doesn't have a very good reputation in the market, but if you still do positive stories, that doesn't move the needle so much, right? So this reputation will be a amalgamation of PR, social, community outreach, CSR, policy. So I think comms, PR in general, we are evolving into sort of a reputation sort of a role rather than just becoming a media coverage sort of a tool. So which will have all these factors, right? Employee, internal communication, social media, community outreach, CSR, policy communication. So it will not just be a press coverage sort of a tool. So it will encompass all these verticals as well. My advice to the future comms professionals would be one, not to treat PR as a coverage machinery, right? Going forward, PR or communications will be a reputation management sort of a umbrella, right? So it will not just be media, but also social media, community outreach, CSR, policy, right? So they need to upskill accordingly, right? That's one. Secondly, data, right? So data is the biggest tool in their arsenal. Whenever they write a storyline or they want to tell a story, right? Data always adds a lot of credibility to it. So without data, your story or anything that you are putting out externally will not hold a lot of water, right? It just becomes a storyline, right? So I think data is their best friend. They should treat best friend as I think they should treat data as their best friend to tell a story. So I think that's something they need to learn a lot.